On a night when the Bitterroot Mountains vanished beneath a storm of ice and wind, Ranger Eleanor Marlowe stumbled upon a sight that would haunt her forever. A wild Mustang, heavy with foal, chained and bleeding in the snow. What seemed like a single act of cruelty soon unraveled into something far darker, an underground trade so brutal and so ingenious in its evil that it would shake her world to its core. The Bitterroot Mountains were gone, swallowed by a wall of white. The storm didn't just cover the land, it erased it. Jagged peaks became soft mounds. Black timber became grey ghosts. Every trail, every landmark had been wiped clean. There was only the snow and the wind, a ceaseless howl that clawed at the valleys like a starved animal. It rattled the pines until their branches groaned under the weight of ice. Miles away, a single ranger station was a tiny square of yellow light, a fragile island in a sea of roaring darkness. But Elena Marlowe wasn't anywhere near that warmth. Her patrol had pushed her deep into the backcountry, into the loneliest cuts of the mountains. Tonight she was on her own, a solitary figure against the absolute fury of a Montana winter. The storm wasn't just snow, it was a physical force, a white wall that stung her skin and swallowed every sound. Eleanor pulled her hood tighter, her breath a cloud in the small halo of her headlamp. She knew these woods. She'd walked them through fire season and quiet spring thaws. But a night like this made everything alien. Even the trees felt like strangers watching her. She was 32 years old, with a decade of service under her belt. She knew how to read the mountains, how to sense when a storm was holding something back. Tonight, the air was sharp with more than just cold. Her standard-issue parka felt thin. Her boots were caked with ice. The radio on her chest just spat static, a distorted hiss like a voice trying to speak from underwater. Figures, she muttered, her own voice sounding small and lost. Routine, she told herself, just another patrol. But her gut was churning. Years of instinct whispered that this wasn't just the wind raising the hair on her neck. Something else was out there, waiting. She slowed her pace, sweeping her light across the tree line. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then she heard it. At first, it was just a faint note, almost lost in the gale. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. She stopped, heart hammering against her ribs. There it was again. A high, broken cry, not an elk, not a deer, it was a horse, but the sound was wrong. Mustangs roamed these mountains, but their calls were short, powerful. This was different. This was strangled. This was pain. She killed her headlamp, pressing a hand to her hood to block the wind, straining to listen. Nothing. Then again, the faint cry. Weaker this time, instinct screamed at her, "Move!" She turned toward the sound, breaking her own trail through snow that climbed to her knees. Every step was a fight. The wind shoved at her shoulders, branches clawed at her sleeves, her thighs burned. The cries were fainter now, like a voice about to give up entirely. She ducked under a fallen pine, its trunk snapped clean by the storm's power. And there, in the shadow of its broken limbs, she saw it. Her light cut across a dark shape hunched against the snow. A horse, its belly swollen and round. For a second she thought it was a trick of the light, but then it lifted its head. Its eyes were wide, glistening, and locked on her. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered. The mare was shackled. Thick iron chains were wrapped around her neck, and one foreleg, bolted into a weathered post, hammered deep into the frozen ground. Her hide was a ruined map of blood and welts, dark stripes cutting through her winter coat. Dried gore was clumped against her flank, black as tar in the beam of her light. Her whole body trembled with every ragged breath. Eleanor froze, her boots rooted to the spot. The cruelty was staggering. This wasn't a wild animal brought down by nature. This was a prisoner, beaten and left to die in the teeth of the storm. The mare's gaze held hers. There was no wild defiance in those eyes, only a raw plea, a terrible mix of fear and a desperate flickering hope. Eleanor's throat went tight. "Easy," she murmured, stepping closer, her palms open. "Easy, girl. I'm here now." Her voice was a thread against the wind, but the mare's ears flicked. She strained once against the chains, a dead rattle of metal, then sagged, too weak to fight any more. Eleanor knelt, sweeping the light across the snow, and that's when she saw them. tire tracks, gouged deep into the drift, leading away into the woods. They were fresh, and there were boot prints, heavy soles, more than one set. At least 2 men, maybe 3, had stood right here. A smear of blood stained the snow, showing where they'd dragged the mare from the truck bed to the post. This wasn't random. This was calculated. This was organized. She touched the chain with a gloved hand. Ice was crusted thick along its links. She pulled the knife from her belt, the cold steel stiff in her numb fingers, and started to work on the shackle. The mare flinched, her eyes rolling white. "Easy," Eleanor said again, crouching lower. "I'm not going to hurt you." The chain fought back. Her blade sparked against the metal. She worked the point into a weak link, her jaw tight, her breath fogging in the cold. "Come on," she hissed. "Come on." Finally, with a sharp snap, one link gave way. The chain sagged. The mare stumbled forward, her knees buckling, nearly collapsing on top of her. Eleanor dropped the knife and caught her, supporting what little weight she could. The mare's body shook violently. Her belly tightened in a hard spasm. Elena's training kicked in. She was in labor, too soon, too weak. "No, no, stay with me," Elena whispered, her hand running along the mare's side. The heartbeat was a faint flutter. They couldn't stay here. The storm would finish what the chains had started. Eleanor swept her light around and saw it. The dark outline of an old hunting shack, half buried in snow, maybe 50 yards away. She gritted her teeth. "Come on, girl, we're moving." It was slow, agonizing work. The mare leaned heavily on Elena's shoulder, her breath coming in ragged bursts. They pushed through the drifts together, woman and horse, a single straining shape against the storm. At last they reached the cabin. Eleanor shoved the warped door open and half-dragged, half-guided the mare inside. The shack was bare, smelling of dust and pine. She pulled a foil emergency blanket from her pack and draped it over the mare's trembling back. She found dry wood and coaxed a small fire to life in the stone hearth. The mare, who she now thought of as Sierra, stood trembling in the flickering light. Her eyes were half-lidded, but still locked on Elena. Elena crouched beside her, a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," she said. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. Outside, the storm clawed at the walls, and in her gut, a cold certainty formed. Whoever did this wasn't finished. She sat against the door, radio hissing uselessly, knife back in her hand, and waited for the dawn. Someone had left their mark out here in the snow, and they would be back to claim it. Dawn broke pale and grey, as if the sun was too tired to push through the storm's remains. Inside the shack, Elena stirred, stiff and cold. The fire was just embers. She shone her light on Sierra. The mare was still standing, barely. She was slick with sweat, trembling, but her eyes were open, tracking Eleanor's every move. "You made it," Eleanor whispered. "But we have to get you out of here." The thought of moving her seemed impossible, but staying was a death sentence. Eleanor set her jaw. The ranger station was their only hope. Outside, her truck was a frosted green shape, half buried at the tree line. She trudged through the snow, pulling rope and a pair of old boards from the bed to make a crude ramp. It took nearly an hour of slow, agonizing work to get Sierra up that ramp and into the bed of the truck. The mare stumbled, leaned, nearly collapsed. But somehow they did it. Elena secured her with padded ropes, then climbed into the driver's seat and cranked the engine to life. In the rearview mirror, Sierra's eyes reflected the weak morning light. Haunted but alive. Elena eased the truck onto the buried road, glancing back every few seconds. "Hang on," she murmured. The ranger station appeared after 2 grueling miles, a timber outpost against the snow. She coaxed Sierra down and into a small wooden pen lined with dry straw. The mare sank down, exhausted. Eleanor grabbed her radio. "Dr. Rains, it's Marlowe. I need you at the station. Emergency. Wild Mustang. Condition critical." The reply came back through the static, a calm, steady baritone. "On my way." Dr. Caleb Rains arrived an hour later. He looked more like a rancher than a vet, tall and lean, with a weathered face and eyes the color of a storm cloud. He carried a leather satchel and a handheld scanner. "Show me the horse," he said, his voice low and efficient. When he saw Sierra, his confident stride faltered. "She's been through hell." They worked in silence, Elena holding the mare steady while Caleb checked her vitals. He frowned, listening with his stethoscope. Pulse is weak, breathing shallow. He traced the web of scars on her flanks. These marks are layered, not fresh. She's been beaten more than once. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She was chained in the storm. Someone left her out there to die. Caleb didn't answer. He pressed his stethoscope to Sierra's swollen belly. The mare groaned. She's late term. The foal's alive, but with this much stress. He shook his head. She's at risk of aborting. Eleanor clenched her fists. The thought was unbearable. Caleb pulled the scanner from his pocket and passed it over Sierra's ear. A sharp beep cut the silence. He stared at the small screen, at the long string of numbers glowing there. Unfamiliar, he muttered. Not federal. What do you mean? Eleanor asked. Wild Mustangs are tagged under the BLM registry. This code, it doesn't match. Someone implanted her illegally. His eyes lifted, sharp and knowing. This isn't random cruelty, Elena. She was being tracked. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Whoever had done this hadn't just picked a random horse. They owned her, or they thought they did. But Caleb wasn't done. He drew a vial of blood, his hand steady. He held it up to the light. That's not right. What? Elena breathed. He tilted it. In the plasma, she could see faint shimmering streaks of greenish blue. He dipped a test strip from his kit into the vial. The paper turned dark, mottled. Sedatives, heavy doses, and something else. He pointed to a dark blotch. See this reaction? That's a banned performance enhancer. They've been drugging her. Why? To test her tolerance, he said. Then he hesitated. Or to use her as transport. The implication hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. The tire tracks, the drag marks, the deliberate, organized cruelty. This wasn't abuse for sport. It was business. It was logistics. Her radio crackled. She snatched it up. Sheriff Callahan, this is Ranger Marlowe. I've got something you need to see. She explained everything, her words rushing out. The chains, the unregistered chip, the drugs. This is deliberate, she finished. Someone's targeting wild horses. There was a long pause, then the sheriff's voice came back, flat and dismissive. A wild horse in a storm ain't a priority, Marlowe. We got real problems. You clean her up, but don't stir up trouble where there isn't any. Elena's hand tightened on the radio. Sheriff, this isn't just abuse. They're implanting chips. They're drugging her. This is trafficking. Another pause, longer this time. When Callahan spoke again, his tone was sharp. Bring me proof, Marlowe, not stories. Until then, keep it off my desk. The line went dead. Elena lowered the radio, a hot anger rising in her chest. Caleb watched her, his face unreadable. He won't listen, he said finally, until you hand him a body or a paper trail. Eleanor's jaw flexed. Then we'll find one. She looked at Sierra, lying in the straw, her breath rasping. This horse is all the proof I need. The wind howled outside, clawing at the antenna until it shrieked. The storm had passed, but in Elena's chest, a deeper, colder one was just beginning to form. That night, long after midnight, the security camera watching the yard caught something. A figure moving slowly along the fence line. He was tall, thin-shouldered, a hunting rifle slung across his back. He wasn't wandering. He was searching. He paused at the edge of the pen, his gaze fixed on the stall where Sierra rested. His breath smoked in the cold air. Suddenly, the motion light above the yard flared to life. The man jerked back, shielding his face, and then melted back into the trees, gone as quickly as he appeared. Inside the stall, Sierra exploded. She shrieked, a high, ragged sound of pure terror, her hooves drumming a frantic rhythm on the floor. Elena was out of her cot in seconds, bursting into the pen to find the mare throwing herself against the rails, foam flying from her muzzle. Caleb hurried in behind her. She's not just scared, he said, his voice grim. She recognizes something. Elena froze. Sierra wasn't afraid of the storm. She smelled someone she knew. Her gut clenched. They had come back. Eleanor grabbed her rifle and burst outside. The night air hit her like a blade. At the edge of the light, a silhouette slipped past the fence. Stop! U.S. Forest Service! Eleanor shouted. The figure halted, turning just enough for the light to catch a sliver of his face. Eyes like glass, a pale scar running down his neck. Then, without a word, he lunged into the darkness and was gone. She raised her rifle, but there was nothing to shoot at. The trail of footprints was already filling with fresh snow. He hadn't come to steal the horse. Not tonight. He'd come to see if she was still here. Morning broke with a deceptive calm. By mid-morning, a silver pickup truck rolled up the track. A man in his mid-30s climbed out, a practiced smile on his face. He wore a dark leather jacket and a cowboy hat tipped low. "Morning," he said, his voice easy and warm. "Heard you had some trouble. Name's Ethan Crow. I do some horse trading. Folks talk." Horse trading. The words made Eleanor's skin crawl. Ethan's eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked to the stall. "Heard you found a wild one. Pregnant, they say. That's a rare find." Eleanor crossed her arms. "She's in Forest Service custody. That's all you need to know." "Of course," he said, holding up his hands, just offering help. Before she could reply, a scream ripped through the air. From inside the stall, Sierra hurled herself against the rails with a violence that shocked them all. Her head was high, ears flat against her skull, the whites of her eyes rolling in terror. She bared her teeth and shrieked again, her hooves splintering the wood. Ethan had taken a casual step toward the stall. Now he froze. "She doesn't like strangers," he said lightly, but his friendly mask had slipped. Elena saw the look in Sierra's eyes. It was the same violent recognition from the night before. This wasn't just fear, it was memory. She glanced at Caleb, who was staring at Ethan, his lips pressed into a thin line. His expression said it all. She knows him. Ethan recovered his grin. "Guess I'll let you get back to it. Holler if you need anything, Ranger." He tipped his hat and strolled back to his truck. As the pickup disappeared down the road, Elena stood rooted to the spot, her fists clenched. He came too soon. He knew too much. Sierra was still thrashing, her eyes locked on the spot where the truck had been. This wasn't some local trader. This was one of them. When the yard was quiet, Elena headed for the tree line. Ethan's truck tracks curved toward the road, but another set of tracks, heavier and wider, led into the trees. She followed them. They led to a crumbling, abandoned barn. Parked in its shadow was an old cargo truck. The back was ajar. Eleanor swung the door open and stared inside. Coils of rope, stained with horsehair. A whip, stiff with dried blood. Scattered syringes that glinted in the dim light. The stench of chemicals and fear hung heavy in the air. Her stomach churned. This was it. The tools of their trade carelessly tossed aside. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos, logging the truck's plate, sealing the back with ranger tape. It wasn't enough for Callahan yet, but it was a start. It was a trail. When she returned, Caleb was standing by the stall, his arms crossed. "Now we know what kind of men we're dealing with." As if on cue, the radio inside the station crackled violently. The storm outside had passed, but the real one, she knew, was just getting started. That night, Eleanor and Caleb huddled over a battered table in the station office. Caleb had hooked his scanner up to an old laptop. He typed in the long string of numbers from Sierra's microchip. The screen blinked, then filled with data. Caleb leaned back, his jaw tight. "Damn it." "What is it?" Eleanor asked. He tapped the screen. "This number. It matches a federal registry, 6 months old. This mare was reported missing from the Bitterroot Preserve." Eleanor straightened, her stomach sinking. She remembered the reports. A dozen Mustangs gone over half a year. Everyone had said they'd wandered off. But this was proof. They hadn't wandered. They'd been stolen. Sierra wasn't just one victim. She was part of something huge. They drove back out to the abandoned barn. Inside the cargo truck, beneath a layer of damp straw, Eleanor found a folded sheet of paper. It was a topographical map of the mountains. Red circles dotted the valleys, marking remote corrals and choke points. One circle, near the Canadian border, was drawn thick and dark. "An old stable," she murmured. "Hunters used it years ago." In the cab, Caleb found receipts. One for veterinary supplies, sedatives and antibiotics, bought under a fake name. The other was a gas slip from a station less than 20 miles from the border. Eleanor's hands went cold. "They're moving them north. This isn't just Montana anymore. Back at the station, Caleb knelt beside Sierra. They're not just stealing them, he said, his voice low. They're breeding them. Or worse, he pointed to a series of faint scars on her belly. See these? Small incisions. That's not from a whip. Those are surgical. The air in the room grew thin. Surgical for what? Elena whispered. Could be artificial insemination. Could be. He shook his head. Add in the drugs, the performance enhancers. This isn't just cruelty, it's experimentation, it's conditioning. They could be using them as mules. He looked at her, his eyes bleak. A pregnant mare is the perfect disguise. Nobody would suspect. To them, these animals aren't just victims, they're tools. Eleanor's skin prickled. A network, a business, cross-border trafficking. Every piece clicked into place. The tire tracks, the whip, the man with the scar, Ethan Crow showing up at her door. It was organized crime, and the horses were only part of it. If we're right, Caleb said softly, this is way beyond your sheriff's office. She knew he was right. She picked up the radio, her thumb hovering over the button to call Callahan, but his dismissive voice echoed in her head. Bring me proof, not stories. A chip, a map, some bloody rope. It wasn't enough. Not yet. She set the radio down hard. Then we gather proof that even he can't ignore. Caleb gave a grim nod. We move carefully, because now they know we're watching. Outside, snow began to fall again. In the control room, one of the yard cameras flashed red, signaling motion. Elena stared at the screen, but all she saw was the endless shifting snow. But she knew, somewhere out there, in the white, they were watching back. The next night, the storm came back with a vengeance. Snow lashed the mountains, driven by gales that rattled the ranger station to its foundations. Elena had a new partner, a young ranger named Daniel Ruiz, sent up after her initial report. He was eager but green, pacing by the windows as the wind howled. The radio was useless, the signal chewed to pieces by the weather. They were on their own. The warning came from the cameras. A pair of headlights cut through the snow, bouncing wildly as a truck barreled toward them. Movement, Daniel said sharply. Elena was already at the window. Figures spilled out of the truck, crouched against the wind. 5 of them, maybe 6. And at their head, unmistakable even in the blizzard, was Ethan Crow. He wore a dark tactical coat, a rifle slung across his chest. In the hands of his men, she saw the glint of glass bottles stuffed with rags. Molotovs. Ethan's voice, amplified by the wind, cut through the storm. Bring out the mare. Positions, Eleanor barked. Daniel shoved a table against the main door. Caleb guided Sierra deeper into the stall, shielding her with bales of straw. Eleanor raised her rifle and peered through a crack in the window boards. They had come for blood. The world exploded in gunfire. Ethan fired first, his muzzle flashing bright. Bullets slammed into the siding, sending splinters flying. Eleanor ducked, then rose and fired back. The station filled with a deafening roar as Daniel joined her, gunshots mixing with the howl of the storm. A glass bottle arced through the air, a comet of fire against the white snow. It smashed against the rear shed. Flames roared up the dry wood, sparks flying into the gale. They're trying to burn us out, Eleanor shouted. The smell of gasoline and smoke filled the air. Heat licked at the walls. In the stall, Sierra erupted. The roar of flames and gunfire shattered her. She screamed, a piercing guttural sound, and thrashed against the pen. Caleb rushed to her side, his hand pressed against her belly. His eyes widened in horror. She's going into labor, he shouted over the den. We can't move her now. Eleanor's head whipped toward him. She saw Sierra's swollen belly contracting in violent spasms. Not now, she thought, torn between the firefight and the birth. Outside, bullets hammered the walls. Elena, I need hands here, Caleb yelled. She glanced at Daniel, who was firing steadily from behind the barricade. Cover us, she shouted, then dropped to her knees beside Caleb. Together they worked in the chaos. Eleanor pressed against Sierra's flank, whispering reassurances as gunshots cracked overhead. Caleb crouched at the mare's hindquarters, his flashlight beam trembling. Push, girl, he murmured. You've got to push. The air was a nightmare of sound. Gunfire, wind, fire, and Sierra's agonized cries. At last, with a wet gasp, The foal slid free into Caleb's waiting arms, a tiny body, slick and shivering. He cleared its airway, rubbing its small chest. The foal let out a thin, pitiful cry. Sierra, exhausted, lifted her head and brushed her newborn with her tongue. "The foal's alive," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. For a moment, the battle outside faded. But it wasn't over. Ethan cursed into the storm. Bullets had failed. Fire had failed. "Fall back," he snarled. The men retreated, dragging their wounded. Before he vanished into the blizzard, Ethan turned back, his voice sharp and venomous. "This isn't over, Ranger." Then he was gone. The yard was quiet except for the crackle of flames and the scream of the wind. Elena and Daniel raced to douse the fire, using buckets of snow until only blackened, steaming timbers remained. Inside, Elena dropped to her knees in the straw. Caleb sat back on his heels, his face pale and streaked with soot. The foal, weak but alive, nestled against Sierra's belly. "We held them off," Elena breathed. "Barely." The words hung in the smoke-filled air. Outside, the blizzard roared on. In the ruin of the station, a fragile new life had been born into a world of fire and war. It was enough. For now. At dawn, Elena stood in the ruined yard. Caleb's voice was raw with exhaustion. "We can't keep her here. If they come back, this place won't hold." He was right. Sierra was too weak, the foal too fragile. They moved quickly. Caleb backed his truck to the stall, and they coaxed Sierra up the ramp, carrying the foal in a blanket. Eleanor sat with them in the truck bed, her hand on the mare's neck, whispering as the truck lurched down the snow-covered road. They drove into the small town of Bitterroot, past shuttered shops and staring faces, to Caleb's private rescue barn at the edge of town. Inside, heat lamps glowed. It felt like a sanctuary. By afternoon, Sheriff Tom Callahan arrived. He stood in the doorway, his usual gruffness gone as he surveyed the bullet-pocked truck, the exhausted ranger, and the battered mare with her shivering newborn. Eleanor straightened, her hands still smudged with ash. Her voice was quiet, but laced with steel. "Still think this was just a storm and a stray horse, Sheriff?" Callahan's jaw worked. He looked from the horse to Elena, and for a long moment he said nothing. Finally, he let out a heavy breath. "You're right. This is bigger than us." He looked at her, then at Caleb. "I'll authorize contact with state and federal. We're not walking away from this." It wasn't an apology, but it was close. At last, the fight was no longer hers alone. That evening, a deputy knocked on the barn door. "We found someone," he said, "out near the border. You'll want to see this." They drove north into the tree line. In a half-collapsed cabin, they found her, a woman gaunt and pale, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. But her eyes were sharp and unbroken. Agent Sofia Delgado, a federal investigator who had vanished 3 months ago, presumed dead. Later, in the quiet of the barn, Sofia told them her story. She'd been tracking a man named Marcus Hale, the head of a cross-border smuggling ring that used the wilderness as its cover. Ethan Crow was his enforcer. They had ambushed her, held her captive for weeks as a warning to law enforcement. She'd slipped free during the last storm, barely surviving. "You stumbled into the same hornet's nest that almost killed me," she said, her voice rough, "and now that you've made noise, they'll come for you harder than before." Then, after the deputies had left, Sofia dropped the final horrifying piece of the puzzle. "You need to understand how far they've gone," she said, her voice low and strained. "They're not just stealing the horses, they're using them. They use pregnant mares to smuggle." The air in the barn froze. "They sedate them," she continued, the horror plain in her voice, "cut them open and slip nylon bags of narcotics, even uncut gemstones, into the abdominal cavity. Then they stitch them back up. The pregnancy hides the swelling. The mares carry their cargo across the border. And when the time comes—" She let the sentence hang in the air. Caleb slammed a hand against the stall rail, his voice breaking. "That's why. The scars, the drugs." Eleanor's stomach turned. "They turned living beings into smuggling machines," she whispered. Callahan broke the silence, his voice heavy. "This is federal. We'll form a task force. We shut Hale down, once and for all." Eleanor rested her hand on Sierra's neck, feeling the life trembling beneath her palm. The battle was no longer a lonely stand in the snow. It had become a war. And now, at last, they had an army. Dawn bled grey over the mountains. In the lot outside Caleb's barn, a convoy of federal agents from the FBI and Fish and Wildlife Service assembled. Kevlar vests, rifles, radios. This was war. Inside, Sophia spread a map on a table. Her finger landed on a red circle. Here, an abandoned stable near the border. It's where they hold the horses before moving them north. It's their processing center. Eleanor strapped her rifle across her back. If they come for Sierra again. They won't get far, Caleb interrupted. I left 2 deputies here with orders to shoot first. Eleanor nodded and followed the others into the cold. The convoy rolled north, tires grinding on ice. The closer they got, the thicker the silence became. The stable was a sagging ruin, half swallowed by snow, but fresh tire tracks cut through the drifts. Recent, Eleanor whispered, within the day. They spread out, moving toward the main doors. Federal agents, show yourselves, Eleanor shouted. Only the wind answered. They kicked the door in. The air inside stank of ether and rot. Empty stalls lined the walls, the wood gouged with frantic hoof marks. Needles and shattered vials littered the straw. This wasn't a stable. This was a slaughterhouse. In a side room, they found a half-burned safe, its contents scattered. An agent bagged a laptop and a stack of hard drives. On a table lay shipping manifests, veterinary receipts, and maps covered in coded routes. The entire operation laid bare. Sophia found a stack of DVDs. She slipped one into a portable player. The screen flickered to life. A mare, bound tight in a harness. 2 masked men standing over her with scalpels. One of them shoved a black nylon pouch toward an incision in her abdomen. Turn it off, Elena choked out. But it kept playing, the horse's eyes rolling in terror. One of the agents threw up against the wall. Sophia snapped the player shut, her face pale. Now you have proof. Eleanor's hand shook as she bagged the documents, monsters, every last one of them. It was Caleb who froze, his fingers tightening on a list marked Trial Runs. His face drained of color. Elena, he croaked. Look. He pointed to a line of numbers. She recognized it instantly. It was the code from Sierra's microchip. Her breath caught in her chest. No, she whispered. Not her. Sophia's voice was flat, grim. They tried. The scars on her belly. You knew. She survived. That makes her even more valuable to them. The raw, ugly truth of it hit Eleanor like a physical blow. They had cut her open. While she carried her foal, the promise she had made to Sierra burned hotter than her rage. Never again. Not to her, not to any of them. As they were packing the last of the evidence, the radio on an agent's vest crackled. It was Callahan. We've got trouble. Someone's watching the rescue stable. Elena's heart seized. Sierra. The foal. The time for uncovering secrets was over. The next fight would be for survival. Night fell heavy. The storm returned, clawing at the town, burying it in a shrieking wall of white. Inside Caleb's rescue barn, the lights flickered. Elena, Callahan, Sophia, and Caleb waited. The tension was a living thing in the room. Then they heard it. The growl of engines, cutting through the blizzard. 2 armored trucks roared into the yard, their headlights slashing across the barn. Men spilled out, dark shapes against the snow. The door of the lead truck opened. Marcus Hale stepped out. He was built like a mountain, a deep scar cutting across his cheek. At his side stood Ethan Crow. A megaphone crackled. Hale's voice boomed over the wind. Hand over the mare, Ranger, or people die tonight. The assault was instant. A side door crashed open and men poured in, guns firing. Wood splintered, hay flew. Eleanor dropped and returned fire. Sophia was beside her, her pistol spitting methodical shots. Callahan barked orders, but the attackers pressed hard. Suddenly, rough hands seized Caleb, dragging him forward, a gun to his temple. Stop or he dies. The firing stopped. Hale stepped into the doorway, framed by the storm. You want your vet? He mocked. Give me the mare and the foal. Eleanor's rifle trembled. Her eyes darted from Caleb's pale face to Sierra's. Sophia whispered, They won't spare him anyway. Caleb met Eleanor's gaze and gave the slightest shake of his head. "Don't." Hale advanced into the barn, stopping at Sierra's stall. "She's mine," he growled. "She survived once. She'll carry again. Hand her over." "Over my dead body," Elena shouted back. Hale's smile widened. "That can be arranged." The answer didn't come from Elena. It came from Sierra. The mare erupted with a scream that tore through the storm. She surged forward, crashing against the wooden rails. A man lunged toward her with a chain. Her hooves lashed out. The crack of bone echoed through the barn as the man flew backward into a wall. The attackers faltered, stunned. Eleanor seized the moment. She swung her rifle and fired point blank at the man holding Caleb. He dropped, and Caleb rolled free. Eleanor tackled him, dragging him behind cover as the barn exploded into chaos again. Callahan dropped a gunman. Sophia's bullet slammed into Ethan's arm. Hale roared, unleashing a stream of fire into the barn. "You think you can stop me? I own this border." Elena rose from cover, firing back. Sierra stood over her foal, a protective fury, her eyes blazing. The barn had become a fortress. Finally, Hale bellowed the order, "Fall back!" His men retreated, stumbling through the snow. Ethan, clutching his bleeding arm, snarled over his shoulder. "We'll finish this in the storm, Ranger." Then they were gone, their truck swallowed by the blizzard. The barn fell quiet, the air thick with smoke. Caleb sat slumped on the ground, a graze on his arm. "They'll be back," he rasped. Eleanor knelt by Sierra's stall, her hand on the mare's neck. "Then so will we," she whispered. The final reckoning was yet to come. Hours later, inside Sheriff Callahan's office, a deputy burst in. Spotters saw trucks moving north, headed for the border depot. Sophia slammed a map on the desk. The old freight hangar, their main staging ground. This was it, the final move. Within minutes, the convoy was rolling north again, a small army swallowed by the blizzard. The depot was a collection of trailers and a large hangar, halos of light glowing faintly through the storm. The federal team fanned out along a ridgeline, snow clawing at their coats. "Hold positions," Sophia's voice crackled in their earpieces. "Wait for my mark." Through the swirling snow, they could see armed men huddled around oil drum fires. Elena crouched in a drift, her pulse hammering. "Go!" Sophia shouted. The night exploded. Agents surged forward as spotlights tore across the yard. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," Chaos answered. Hale's men opened fire, orange muzzle flashes spitting against the whiteout. Bullets shrieked and ricocheted off frozen steel. The hangar echoed with the sound of war. Then Marcus Hale strode out of the hangar, a warlord carved from the storm. "You'll never take me alive," he boomed. Elena broke from cover, charging across the yard, her boots sinking in deep snow. Hale saw her. Their eyes locked. He fired, bullets screaming past her cheek. She dove behind a crate, her breath tearing at her lungs. He stalked forward, relentless, firing again, raining splinters over her head. She slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle, rose, and fired. Her shot ripped through his shoulder. He staggered, bellowed with rage, and his rifle clattered to the snow. She charged. They collided in the open, fists and fury meeting in the storm. They fell into a drift, rolling, clawing, their breath exploding in the freezing air. On the other side of the yard, Ethan Crow crept through the chaos. He saw Eleanor tangled with Hale, her back exposed. A cruel grin twisted his lips. He raised his shotgun, and the storm itself answered. A shriek cut through the yard, high and wild. Out of the white blur, a dark shape thundered toward him. Sierra. Caleb had brought her in the convoy, refusing to leave her behind. In the chaos, she had broken free from her trailer. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was vengeance. Her hooves lashed out, a brutal crack against Ethan's chest. He flew backward, his shotgun spinning into the snow, and hit the ground unconscious. For a heartbeat, even Hale's men froze, shaken by the sight of a wild horse standing guard over the ranger who had saved her. Nature had chosen a side. Eleanor twisted free from Hale's grasp, seized his arm, and slammed him face down into the snow, cuffing his wrists. "You can't stop this," he spat, blood staining his teeth. "Others will take my place." Eleanor leaned close, her voice a blade. "Not tonight, not with her watching." She nodded toward Sierra, who stood over her foal like a sentinel. The fight went out of him. Federal agents swarmed in, rifles leveled and hauled him to his feet. The warehouse was a treasure trove of evidence: ropes stained with blood, crates of sedatives, surgical tools, ledgers detailing every transaction. The skeleton of Hale's evil empire laid bare. Enough to bury them for life, Callahan said, shaking his head. As Hale was dragged away in cuffs, the storm began to ease. The snow slackened to a whisper. On the horizon, dawn bled pale pink into the clouds. Elena stood beside Sierra and her foal. Her hand rested on the mare's damp mane. The foal nudged close, blinking in the new light. Caleb approached quietly. "It's over," he said softly. Elena watched the rising sun. "No," she said, "for them it's just the beginning." Sierra lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the vast open wilderness beyond. The storm had passed. The ring was ash. What remained was freedom. Fragile but alive. Weeks passed, the snow melted, and the Bitterroot Range came back to life. In Caleb's barn, Sierra grew strong again, her scars fading. The foal, clumsy and full of life, danced beside her. Every morning, Elena would visit, her hand brushing Sierra's mane, a quiet, unbreakable bond forming between them. The day of their release came with a pale blue dawn. A small crowd of rangers, deputies, and townfolk gathered at the trailhead. The trailer door opened. Sierra stepped out into the crisp morning air, her foal close behind. She raised her head, her ears flicking, tasting the scent of pine and freedom. Eleanor unclipped the halter. She crouched low, her hand on Sierra's neck one last time. "Run free," she whispered. "You're home now." For a heartbeat, Sierra's dark eyes met hers. Then, with a toss of her mane, she turned and moved into the meadow. The foal bounded after her. "They're back where they belong," Caleb murmured. That afternoon, on the courthouse steps, Sheriff Callahan stood at a podium. "I was wrong," he said, his voice deep with a new humility. "What Ranger Marlowe uncovered was a wound on our land. Her persistence saved not just lives, but the legacy of these mountains." The town applauded, a warm, heartfelt sound. From the seeds of blood and fire, something new began to grow. They called it the Mustang Sanctuary, a permanent refuge for horses rescued from trafficking and abuse. Caleb would run the veterinary care. Sophia would handle the legal side, and Elena would be its heart, the ranger who fought through a storm to bring one mare and her foal back from the brink. Evening laid a golden wash over the foothills. From a ridge, Elena, Caleb, and Sophia watched the valley below. There, Sierra moved at a canter, her body strong, her mane catching the last light. At her side, her foal ran, its legs no longer clumsy. Then, from the tree line, the rest of the herd appeared. Dark shapes flowing into the meadow, answering Sierra's call. They merged into one thundering body of muscle and life, their hooves drumming a song older than any fence. Eleanor watched them run, the mare she had freed and the foal that had nearly died, both now safe, both now home. The herd dissolved into the distance, their shapes glowing against the horizon, running free under a sky that bled from gold into indigo. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out, hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.